You might want to rethink what you just said. The sentence landed softly, almost politely, but in the 47th floor conference room overlooking Midtown Manhattan, it cut sharper than any raised voice ever could. Conversation stopped mid-breath. The low hum of the air conditioning suddenly felt louder, colder. Naomi Brooks didn't move from her seat at the edge of the long glass table. Her posture was steady, composed, her dark blazer pressed clean, her tablet resting neatly in front of her like it had been placed there with intention. Across from her, Richard Halston leaned back in his leather chair, one ankle resting over his knee, a faint smile curling at the edge of his lips as if he had just heard something mildly entertaining rather than something that challenged him. "Excuse me?" he asked, tilting his head, his tone light but edged with disbelief. Around him, a few executives shifted in their seats, eyes flicking between Naomi and the man at the head of the table, Ethan Caldwell, who had yet to say a word. Naomi met Richard's gaze without hesitation. "You might want to rethink what you just said," she repeated, her voice calm, even, carrying just enough weight to settle over the room like a thin layer of dust. Richard chuckled under his breath, tapping his pen twice against the polished surface. "I think I said exactly what I meant," he replied. "We're here to discuss a multi-million-dollar acquisition. I'd prefer to speak with someone who has the authority to make decisions." The word authority lingered in the air longer than it should have. A subtle shift rippled through the room. Someone adjusted their tie. Someone else glanced down at their notes, pretending to be busy. Naomi didn't react. Not visibly. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of her tablet, her expression unchanged, but there was something in her stillness that didn't read as passive. It read as deliberate. At the far end of the table, Ethan Caldwell sat with his hands loosely clasped in front of him, his eyes lowered just enough to give the impression he was reviewing the documents spread before him. But he wasn't reading. He was listening. Every word. Every pause. Every subtle inflection. Richard leaned forward now, placing both hands on the table as if to anchor the room back under his control. "No offense," he added, though the words carried none of the apology they suggested, "but I didn't realize we'd be negotiating through an assistant." The word landed heavier this time. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just precise enough to draw a line. Naomi inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that steadies rather than reacts. Then, without looking away, she reached forward and tapped her tablet once. The screen lit up, casting a soft glow across her face. "You are," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The room stilled again, but this time it wasn't confusion that filled the silence. It was tension. Real, undeniable tension. Richard's smile flickered, just for a second, before returning, tighter now. "Then I suppose we have a problem," he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly, as if considering the statement from a distance. "No," she replied, her tone steady, almost thoughtful. "You do." A quiet shift passed through the room like a ripple through still water. One of Richard's partners cleared his throat but said nothing. Another leaned back, arms crossing slowly, as if recalculating something he hadn't expected to reconsider. And still, Ethan Caldwell hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. But if anyone had been watching closely, they would have noticed the subtle change in the room's center of gravity. It wasn't around Richard anymore. It wasn't even around Ethan. It had shifted, quietly, almost invisibly, to Naomi. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, thin and fragile, across the polished glass table as if one wrong word could shatter it. Richard Halston leaned back again, slower this time, his eyes narrowing just enough to signal that the tone of the room had shifted in a direction he did not appreciate. He tapped his pen once, then again, but the sound no longer carried authority. It sounded smaller now, almost uncertain. "That is a bold claim," he said finally, his voice measured, controlled. "For someone in your position." Naomi did not respond immediately. She let the words settle, let them reveal themselves for what they were. Then she glanced down at her tablet, her fingers moving with quiet precision. Position, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. That is interesting. She tapped once more, and the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life, displaying a clean set of projections, numbers arranged with careful clarity. Because from where I am sitting, she continued, lifting her gaze back to him, the position that matters is the one backed by facts. A few heads turned toward the screen. The numbers were not new, but the way they were presented was different. Cleaner. Sharper. Impossible to ignore. Richard followed their attention, his jaw tightening slightly. We have already reviewed these projections, he said. Your summary does not change the fundamentals. Naomi nodded once, acknowledging the statement without conceding to it. You are right, she said calmly. The fundamentals do not change. Which is exactly why your clause does not belong there. She stepped forward just slightly, enough to reach the control panel and highlight a specific section on the screen. A small portion of the contract expanded, the text crisp and undeniable. Section 8.3, she said. Buried under projected growth adjustments. It transfers liability under specific performance conditions that are unlikely but not impossible. And if triggered, it shifts the risk entirely onto our side. The room shifted again, but this time it was not subtle. Chairs creaked. Someone leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Another executive quietly flipped through his printed copy, searching for the same clause. Richard's pen stopped moving altogether. That is a standard protective measure, he replied, but his voice had lost a fraction of its earlier ease. Naomi shook her head slightly. No, she said. It is structured like one. But it is not standard. The language is adjusted just enough to pass a surface review while altering the outcome. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air before finishing the thought. It is designed to be missed. A heavier silence followed. Not confusion this time. Recognition. One of Richard's partners shifted in his seat, his expression tightening as he reread the clause in front of him. Another slowly removed his glasses, exhaling under his breath. The room was beginning to see it. Richard leaned forward again, both hands now flat on the table, his composure held together by intention rather than ease. You are making assumptions, he said. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. I am reading what is written, she replied. The difference between the two statements settled heavily between them. For the first time since the meeting began, Richard did not immediately respond. His eyes flicked toward Ethan, as if expecting him to intervene, to correct the direction this was taking. But Ethan Caldwell remained exactly where he had been, his posture unchanged, his silence intact. Only his eyes had lifted now, steady and focused, not on the screen, not on Richard, but on Naomi. Watching. Measuring. The air in the room felt different now. Not tense in the same way as before. Sharper. Clearer. Like something that had been hidden was no longer fully under control. Naomi straightened slightly, her hands resting calmly at her sides. We can continue, she said, her tone even, professional, as if nothing unusual had just happened. But we will need to remove that clause first. No one laughed this time. No one shifted uncomfortably or looked away. They were all waiting. Not for her. For him. And for the first time since the meeting began, the weight of that expectation pressed directly onto Ethan Caldwell, even as he remained silent, the decision forming somewhere behind the stillness of his expression. No one spoke. Not immediately. The expectation that had quietly gathered in the room now pressed down with weight, settling over every polished surface, every carefully placed document, every controlled breath. Naomi did not look at Ethan. She did not need to. She had already said what needed to be said. Across the table, Richard Halston exhaled slowly, the sound measured, deliberate, as if buying himself a moment to regain control of something that had slipped just out of reach. This is becoming unnecessarily dramatic, he said, his voice calm again, but tighter now, less fluid than before. We are discussing a clause that has been vetted by legal teams on both sides. If there were any real concern, it would have been raised earlier. Naomi did not interrupt. She allowed him to finish, her stillness once again doing more work than any reaction could. Then she spoke, just as evenly as before. It was raised, she said. A subtle shift moved through the room. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. By whom? He asked. Naomi's gaze did not waver. By me, she answered. The words did not come with emphasis. They did not need to. They landed with clarity, precise and undeniable. One of the executives on Richard's side glanced down quickly at his folder, flipping through pages with a new sense of urgency. Another leaned toward him, whispering something under his breath. The ripple was no longer contained. It was spreading. Richard's jaw tightened just enough to be noticed. If that were the case, he said, choosing each word more carefully now, it would have been addressed through proper channels. Naomi gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. It was, she replied. 3 weeks ago. Then again last Friday. And once more this morning, before this meeting began. The room went still in a different way this time. Not tense. Not uncertain. Just quiet in the face of something that could no longer be dismissed. Richard did not respond right away. His fingers, which had once tapped with effortless rhythm, now rested flat against the table, unmoving. He turned his head slightly toward one of his partners, who avoided his gaze entirely, focusing instead on the documents in front of him as if they had suddenly become far more complicated than before. Naomi continued, not pressing, not escalating, simply placing the truth where it could not be ignored. Each time, the language remained unchanged, she said. Which suggests it was not an oversight. She paused for a fraction of a second, then added, it suggests intent. That word settled heavily into the room. Intent. It did not accuse loudly. It did not need to. It redefined everything that had come before it. Richard leaned back again, slower this time, his posture no longer relaxed but controlled, contained. You are drawing conclusions, he said, but the confidence that had once carried his voice was now thinner, stretched. Naomi did not argue. I am connecting patterns, she said. At the far end of the table, Ethan Caldwell finally moved. It was a small movement. Almost imperceptible. His hands separated, one resting lightly against the table as he leaned forward just enough to shift the balance of the room once more. No one spoke. No one interrupted. The air seemed to hold itself in place. Ethan's gaze moved from the screen to the documents in front of Richard, then to the faces around the table, reading them one by one. Not hurried. Not uncertain. Just precise. Then, finally, his eyes settled on Naomi. Not with surprise. Not with doubt. With recognition. As if something he had already known was now being confirmed in real time. The silence stretched, but it was no longer fragile. It was decisive. Richard noticed it too. He straightened slightly, his voice sharpening just enough to reclaim ground. If this is how your team handles negotiation, he said, then perhaps we need to reconsider whether this partnership is viable. The statement was meant to redirect. To re-establish control. To remind the room where the stakes were. Millions of dollars. Months of planning. A deal that should not be easily disrupted. Naomi did not respond. She simply waited. Because now, for the first time since the meeting began, it was no longer her turn to speak. And everyone in the room knew it. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Not because they were loud, but because of what they implied. Richard Halston's statement was not just a reaction. It was a line drawn, an attempt to reclaim control by reframing the moment into something transactional, something he understood. But no one responded right away. The room did not rush to fill the silence. It held it. At the far end of the table, Ethan Caldwell finally shifted fully forward, his hand resting flat against the glass surface, the faint reflection of his fingers stretching beneath it. When he spoke, His voice was quiet, but it carried with it an authority that did not need volume to be felt. "You are right," he said. Richard blinked once, clearly not expecting agreement so easily. "Then we understand each other," he replied quickly, leaning into the opening, his confidence flickering back for a brief moment. "This kind of disruption is not productive. We are here to move forward, not to dissect every minor detail." Ethan did not nod. He did not validate the direction. Instead, he let a small pause settle between them, just long enough to make the next words land differently. "We do need to reconsider the partnership," Ethan continued. The shift was immediate. Subtle, but undeniable. Richard's expression tightened again, the brief return of control slipping through his fingers before it could fully form. "Good," he said, though the word came slower now. "Then I assume we can refocus and—" "No," Ethan interrupted, not raising his voice, but ending the sentence before it could be completed. The interruption itself was calm, precise, leaving no room for interpretation. The room went still again. Not uncertain this time. Anticipating. Ethan's gaze moved briefly across the table, acknowledging the others without truly engaging them, before settling back on Richard. "We are not reconsidering the structure," he said. "We are reconsidering who we are structuring it with." The distinction landed heavier than anything said before. One of Richard's partners shifted sharply in his seat. Another exhaled under his breath, the sound barely contained. Richard leaned forward, his composure now held together by effort rather than ease. "I think that is an overreaction," he said, his tone tightening, controlled but strained. "You are basing this on an interpretation that—" Ethan lifted a single hand slightly, not in dismissal, but in finality. The gesture was small, but it stopped the sentence immediately. "I am basing this," he said, "on what I allow in my company." His voice remained even, but there was something in it now that had not been there before. Not anger. Not frustration. Decision. He turned his head slightly, his attention shifting from Richard to Naomi, just for a moment. It was not a long look. It did not need to be. It was enough. Then he looked back. "You were given multiple opportunities to address the concern," Ethan continued. "You chose not to." Richard's jaw tightened. "We did not agree with the assessment," he said. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the statement without conceding to it. "And that is your choice," he replied. "Just like this is mine." The word settled into place with quiet finality. There was no escalation. No raised voices. Just a clear line that had now been drawn in a different place entirely. Ethan reached for the folder in front of him, closing it with a soft, deliberate motion that echoed faintly against the glass. "We are done here," he said. The sentence was simple. Controlled. Absolute. No one moved at first. The weight of what had just happened needed a second to register. Millions of dollars, months of negotiation, carefully constructed projections, all undone in a matter of seconds. Not by conflict. Not by chaos. But by a decision. Richard stared at him, the disbelief now fully visible, no longer masked by composure. "You are walking away from this?" he asked, his voice lower now, sharper. Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "No," he said calmly. "I am walking away from you." The difference was unmistakable. A quiet shock moved through the room. Papers remained untouched. No one reached for their pens. No one checked their phones. Because for the first time, the value of the deal had shifted. It was no longer measured in numbers. It was measured in something else entirely. And everyone in that room understood it. No one reached for the door right away. The sentence still echoed, not in sound, but in consequence. "We are done here." It was not just an ending. It was a shift. Naomi remained standing beside the table, her laptop held lightly against her side, her expression unchanged, but her eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in the silence that had replaced the earlier confidence. Across from her, Richard Halston did not stand. Not yet. His hand rested flat against the glass surface, fingers spread slightly, as if grounding himself in something that no longer felt steady. You are making a mistake, he said, his voice lower now, controlled, but stripped of its earlier ease. Ethan Caldwell did not respond immediately. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt with a small, deliberate motion, as if the conversation had already moved beyond negotiation. That is possible, Ethan said finally. But it will not be this one. The distinction landed cleanly. Around the table, chairs began to shift. Not abruptly, not all at once, but in small movements that signaled something had already been decided, even if not everyone had accepted it yet. One of Richard's partners leaned toward him, whispering something urgent, his voice barely contained. Another was already gathering his papers, though his movements lacked direction, as if habit had taken over where clarity had not yet arrived. Naomi watched it all without interruption. She did not step forward. She did not speak. Because this moment was not hers to drive anymore. It was unfolding on its own. Richard finally stood, slower than expected, his chair sliding back with a muted sound that seemed louder in the quiet room. He looked at Ethan, then at Naomi, then back again, as if recalculating something that no longer followed the rules he had come in with. This deal was worth over $80 million, he said, the number placed carefully, deliberately, as if it could restore balance simply by being spoken aloud. You do not walk away from that over a disagreement. Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. I just did, he replied. There was no emphasis. No need to reinforce the statement. It stood on its own. Richard exhaled sharply through his nose, the restraint in his posture beginning to show its strain. You are letting her dictate the outcome, he said, the words directed at Ethan but angled unmistakably toward Naomi. The shift in tone was subtle, but it was there. And it did not go unnoticed. Naomi's expression did not change, but something in the room did. A quiet awareness. A recognition of the line that had just been approached again. Ethan's gaze sharpened, not in anger, but in clarity. No, he said calmly. I am letting her reveal it. The correction was immediate. Precise. It reframed everything. Richard's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, the argument he had been forming losing shape. Before it could fully take hold. Behind him, one of his own partners finally spoke up, his voice cautious but firm. We should take a moment, he said, looking between them. Re-evaluate the terms, address the concerns, and come back to the table. It was an attempt to salvage. To reset. To return to something familiar. Ethan shook his head once. Not dismissive. Just certain. There is no table to come back to, he said. The word settled with finality. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, the only movement she had made in several moments, then turned toward the door. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just with the quiet confidence of someone who understood exactly what had just happened. Her reflection moved across the glass wall as she stepped forward, the city skyline stretching behind her in long lines of light and steel. For a brief moment, the room watched her. Not as an assistant. Not as a background presence. But as the person who had seen what others had missed, who had spoken when it mattered, and who had not needed permission to do it. Ethan followed a step behind, not leading, not overshadowing, simply aligned. And as the door opened with a soft, controlled sound, the room they left behind felt different than the one they had entered. Quieter. Smaller. As if something essential had just been removed. And for the first time since the meeting began, the people still standing inside understood that the most valuable thing in the room had never been the deal at all. The hallway outside the conference room felt different from the inside, quieter in a way that carried weight rather than absence. The soft hum of the building's ventilation system replaced the tension that had filled the room moments before, and the muted reflections of the city stretched across the polished marble floor beneath their feet. Naomi walked a few steps ahead, her pace steady, unhurried, her heels striking the floor in a calm, even rhythm. She did not look back. She did not need to. Behind her, the glass door closed with a controlled click, sealing off the room and everything left unresolved inside it. Ethan followed at a measured distance, his expression unchanged, but his attention no longer divided. It was focused now, clear in a way it had not been before. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was settled, like something that had finally reached its conclusion. They passed a row of floor-to-ceiling windows, the late afternoon light casting long lines across the corridor, turning the city outside into a blurred pattern of movement and steel. Naomi slowed slightly near the corner, her reflection catching in the glass, then stopped. She did not turn immediately. Instead, she let the stillness hold for a brief moment before finally facing him. "You did not have to do that," she said. Her voice was calm, composed, but quieter now, stripped of the formal edge it had carried inside the meeting. Ethan studied her for a second, not answering right away. The question was not simple, even if it sounded like one. "Yes," he said finally. "I did." Naomi's expression did not change, but her eyes held his, searching not for validation, but for clarity. "It was a strong deal," she said. $80 million does not come around often." Ethan gave a small nod, acknowledging the truth of it. "No," he agreed. "It does not." Another brief silence followed, but this one felt different. Not heavy. Just honest. Naomi shifted her laptop slightly in her hands, her posture still composed, still controlled, but something in her stance had softened, just enough to reveal the weight she had been carrying earlier. "They would have adjusted the clause," she added. "Eventually." Ethan's gaze remained steady. "Eventually is not the same as willingly," he said. The distinction settled between them. Naomi exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "You let it go further than I expected," she said after a moment. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. Ethan did not deny it. "I needed to see how far they would take it," he replied. "And how you would handle it." Naomi's brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in quiet recognition. "You already knew about the clause," she said. It was not a question. Ethan allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible shift in expression. "I knew enough," he said. "But knowing something exists is not the same as seeing it exposed." Naomi considered that, her gaze drifting briefly toward the window before returning to him. "So this was a test," she said. Ethan shook his head once. "No," he replied. "It was a confirmation." The difference lingered. Naomi looked at him for a long second, then gave a small nod, accepting the answer for what it was. The corridor remained quiet around them, the distant sound of an elevator bell echoing faintly from somewhere down the hall. For the first time since the meeting began, there was nothing left to prove. No tension to manage. No room to control. Just the outcome. Ethan adjusted his jacket slightly, his posture relaxed but precise. "You were right to push," he said. "Most people would have let it slide." Naomi's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Most people would not have noticed it," she replied. Ethan held her gaze. "That is why you are not most people." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything he had said in the conference room. Naomi did not respond right away. She let the moment settle, then glanced once more toward the city beyond the glass, the skyline stretching endlessly in the distance. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan followed her gaze for a brief second before answering. "Now," he said, his voice calm, certain, "we find a partner who understands the difference between opportunity and respect." Naomi nodded once, the clarity of the statement matching the certainty in her own expression. Then, without another word, she turned and continued down the corridor, her pace steady once again. And this time, when Ethan walked beside her, it was not as someone following behind, but as someone moving forward with her, the decision they had just made carrying them both into something that had not existed before. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, breaking the quiet rhythm of their footsteps. Naomi stepped inside first, pressing the button for the lobby without hesitation, her reflection multiplying across the mirrored walls as the doors closed behind them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city continued. Moving beyond the glass tower, unseen now, replaced by the faint hum of cables and the steady descent. Ethan stood beside her, hands relaxed at his sides, his gaze fixed forward, but his attention was not on the floor numbers lighting up one by one. It was on the shift that had just taken place, something intangible yet undeniable. Naomi exhaled slowly, the tension that had held her posture earlier easing just slightly, though her composure remained intact. "They will call," she said, her voice even, as if stating a fact already confirmed. Ethan gave a small nod. "They will," he agreed. The elevator passed the 35th floor, the numbers blinking in quiet sequence. Naomi glanced at the panel briefly, then back at the reflection in front of her. "They will offer to remove the clause," she continued. "They will say it was a misunderstanding. They will try to reset the tone." Ethan allowed a faint, almost knowing expression to cross his face. "Yes," he said. "They will do all of that." Naomi shifted her weight slightly, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of her laptop. "And?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it carried weight. "Not about the deal. About the decision." Ethan did not answer immediately. He watched the numbers drop from 34 to 33, then to 32, as if measuring the distance not in flaws, but in certainty. "And it will not matter," he said finally. Naomi's reflection met his in the mirror. "Because of the clause?" she asked. Ethan shook his head once. "Because of the choice," he replied. The distinction settled quietly between them. Naomi studied him for a second, then gave a small nod, as if aligning something internally with what had just been said. The elevator slowed slightly as it approached the lower floors, the faint shift in motion barely noticeable but present. "You knew they would push," she said after a moment. Ethan did not deny it. "I expected resistance," he said. "Not disregard." Naomi's gaze sharpened slightly. "There is a difference," she said. Ethan looked at her now, directly, not through reflection. "There is," he confirmed. Another brief silence followed, but it was not empty. It carried understanding. The elevator passed the 20th floor. Naomi let out a quiet breath, not of relief, but of release. "You could have stepped in earlier," she said. Again, not an accusation. Just clarity. Ethan considered the statement, then nodded once. "I could have," he admitted. "But then they would have adjusted for me." Naomi's brow lifted slightly. Instead of revealing themselves, she finished. Ethan gave a faint nod. "Exactly." The elevator continued its descent, the steady rhythm of movement grounding the moment. Naomi looked forward again, her posture steady, her presence unchanged, but something about her now carried a different kind of weight. Not pressure. Recognition. "You let them show you who they were," she said. Ethan's voice remained calm. And they did not hesitate. The doors slid open again, this time to the expansive lobby, where polished stone floors reflected the warm lighting and distant conversations blended into a low, constant murmur. Naomi stepped out, her pace steady, her path clear. Ethan followed beside her, matching her stride without effort. As they moved through the space, a few heads turned, subtle acknowledgments from people who recognized him, but he did not break his focus. Neither of them did. Near the exit, Naomi slowed slightly, her gaze shifting toward the glass doors that opened to the street beyond, where the city moved with its usual urgency, unaware of the decision that had just been made above it. "They will not expect this," she said quietly. Ethan stopped beside her, his eyes following hers toward the street. "No," he replied. "They will not." Naomi turned to him, just slightly. "Then what are they going to expect?" she asked. Ethan's expression remained calm, but there was something in it now that hinted at what was coming next, something unspoken but certain. "They will expect us to come back," he said. Naomi held his gaze. And we will not, she replied. It was not a question. Ethan nodded once. No, he said. Then he reached for the door, pushing it open as the sound of the city rushed in, louder, faster, alive. Naomi stepped through first, the light catching briefly against the glass behind her, and as they moved out onto the street, the deal they had left behind no longer felt like something lost, but something they had chosen to leave exactly where it belonged. The city did not pause for them. It never did. As the glass doors closed behind them, the noise of Manhattan rushed in fully now, a layered sound of distant sirens, honking taxis, footsteps moving in every direction at once. Naomi stepped onto the sidewalk without hesitation, her pace steady, her posture unchanged, but the light outside caught differently against her face, sharper, more defined. Ethan followed just a step behind before matching her stride, the rhythm of their movement aligning without effort as they merged into the flow of the street. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The decision they had made upstairs did not need immediate explanation. It carried its own clarity. A black sedan idled at the curb ahead, the driver already stepping out as he recognized Ethan, opening the rear door with a practice motion. Ethan paused beside it, but did not get in right away. Instead, he turned slightly toward Naomi, who had slowed just enough to meet his glance. "We should head back," he said. Naomi nodded once, but her gaze drifted past the car, out toward the moving crowd, the endless stream of people crossing intersections, weaving through traffic, each one carrying their own purpose, their own direction. "They are going to call within the hour," she said. It was not speculation. It was certainty. Ethan leaned lightly against the edge of the open car door, his expression calm. "They will not wait that long," he replied. Naomi's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest agreement. "No," she said. "They will not." As if on cue, a vibration broke through the steady rhythm of the street. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, the screen lighting up with a name that neither of them needed to read twice. Richard Halston. The call continued to ring, the name steady, persistent. Naomi glanced at it, then back at Ethan, her expression unchanged. "That was faster than expected," she said quietly. Ethan looked at the screen for a moment longer, the ringing continuing, insistent but controlled, like everything else Richard had done that day. Then, without a word, he turned the phone over, silencing it, letting the call fade into absence. Naomi watched the motion, not surprised, but attentive. "You are not going to answer," she said. Again, not a question. Ethan slid the phone back into his pocket. "No," he replied. The simplicity of the answer carried more weight than any explanation could have. Naomi nodded once, accepting it without hesitation. The driver remained still beside the open door, waiting, but not interrupting, trained to understand when silence was part of the decision. A second vibration followed. Then a third. Messages this time. Emails. Attempts to re-establish connection, to reopen something that had already been closed. Naomi shifted her laptop slightly in her hands, her gaze steady. "They will offer to remove everything," she said. "The clause, the conditions, even the timeline." Ethan glanced briefly toward the flow of traffic, then back at her. "They will offer more than that," he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "What else is there?" she asked. Ethan's expression remained calm, but there was something sharper beneath it now. "They will offer respect," he said. The word settled differently this time. Not as a value. As a strategy. Naomi understood immediately. Her eyes did not narrow. They did not shift. They simply held the thought in place. "Too late," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Exactly." Another car passed, the reflection of sunlight flashing briefly across the building's glass surface behind them. The city continued moving, unchanged by what had just happened, unaware of the shift that had taken place in a room high above it. Naomi looked at him for a second longer, then spoke, her voice quieter now, more grounded. "You knew this would happen," she said. Ethan did not deny it. I knew they would try to fix it, he replied. Naomi's gaze sharpened just slightly. That is not the same thing, she said. Ethan met her eyes. No, he agreed. It is not. The difference lingered between them, clear and undeniable. Naomi exhaled softly, her shoulders settling into a new kind of ease. Then, what are we doing next? She asked. Ethan straightened slightly, stepping away from the car door for a moment, his gaze moving across the street, as if already looking beyond the moment they were in. We are going to find someone who does not need to be corrected before they understand the line, he said. Naomi nodded once, the clarity of the answer aligning with something already formed in her own mind. The phone vibrated again in Ethan's pocket, persistent, insistent, but no longer relevant. He did not reach for it this time. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing lightly toward the open car. After you, he said. Naomi held his gaze for a brief second, then stepped forward, entering the car without hesitation, her movement smooth, certain. As the door closed behind her and Ethan followed, the noise of the city dimmed slightly, replaced by the quiet interior of the vehicle. Outside, the calls continued. Inside, the decision had already been made. And somewhere above them, in a conference room now filled with second thoughts, the people who had misread the moment were only just beginning to understand what they had lost. The car moved smoothly into traffic, merging with the steady flow of late afternoon Manhattan, the city stretching around them in layers of motion and light. Inside, the quiet was immediate, almost deliberate, the outside noise reduced to a distant hum behind tinted glass. Naomi sat angled slightly toward the window, her reflection faint against the skyline as buildings slid past in long, uninterrupted lines. Ethan sat across from her, his posture relaxed but focused, his attention no longer divided by negotiation or interruption. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence carried forward, not empty, but full of what had already been decided. Then the phone vibrated again, more insistent this time, the screen lighting up against the dark interior. Ethan glanced at it briefly before setting it face down on the seat beside him. Naomi did not need to see the name to understand. They are escalating, she said quietly. Ethan gave a small nod. They are realizing, he replied. The distinction lingered between them, subtle but precise. Outside, a traffic light shifted from green to yellow, cars slowing in a controlled wave as the driver eased the vehicle to a stop. The pause gave the moment space, a brief stillness in the middle of constant movement. Naomi shifted her gaze from the window to Ethan, studying him for a second longer than before. You expected them to call, she said. But you did not expect them to panic this quickly. Ethan allowed a faint acknowledgement. I expected them to calculate, he said. Not react. Naomi's expression sharpened slightly. There is a difference, she said. Ethan met her gaze. There is, he confirmed. The phone vibrated again, this time longer, a call instead of a message. It filled the quiet space between them for a few seconds before stopping on its own, unanswered. Naomi looked down briefly at the device, then back up. If you answer now, she said, they will think this is still negotiable. Ethan did not reach for the phone. It is not, he replied. Naomi nodded once, the clarity of the answer aligning with her own understanding. The car began moving again as the light turned green, the city continuing its rhythm, indifferent to decisions made behind closed doors. Buildings passed, reflections shifting across the glass like moving patterns of steel and sky. Naomi leaned back slightly, her posture easing, but her focus remained steady. They underestimated you, she said after a moment. Ethan's expression did not change. No, he said. They underestimated you. The correction was immediate. Naomi held his gaze for a second, then looked away, not dismissing the statement, but absorbing it in silence. The phone vibrated again, shorter this time, another message, another attempt. Ethan ignored it. The pattern had already been broken. They will not stop, Naomi said. Not today. Ethan nodded once. They will try to reach the board, he said. They will try to create pressure from the outside. Naomi considered that, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought. They will say you acted too quickly, she added. That you let emotion override logic. Ethan allowed a faint shift in expression, something close to recognition but not agreement. They can say whatever they need to, he said. Naomi looked at him again. And what will you say? She asked. The question settled between them, quiet but direct. Ethan did not answer immediately. He watched the city move for a moment, the reflection sliding across the window like time passing in real time. Then he spoke, his voice steady, grounded. I will say we made a decision based on alignment, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Alignment, she repeated. Ethan nodded. If respect is conditional, he continued, then the partnership is already broken. The word settled with a different kind of weight. Not reactive. Foundational. Naomi exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly as the clarity of the statement anchored the moment. They are going to learn that the hard way, she said. Ethan glanced briefly at the phone, now still for the first time in several minutes, then back at her. Yes, he said. They are. The car turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the main avenue fading behind them, replaced by a more controlled pace, a different rhythm. Naomi looked out again, her reflection steady against the glass, her presence unchanged but no longer questioned. You could have lost a lot today, she said. Ethan's response came without hesitation. I did not lose anything, he said. Naomi turned back to him, her eyes searching his for a brief moment. Not even the deal, she asked. Ethan met her gaze fully now, his expression calm, certain. Especially not the deal, he replied. The answer settled into the space between them, final and clear. Outside, the city continued forward, unaware of the shift that had just taken place, but inside the car, something had already been redefined. Not in numbers. Not in contracts. But in the quiet understanding of what they were willing to stand for, and what they were not. The car slowed as it approached the company headquarters, a sleek tower of glass and steel rising cleanly against the fading light of late afternoon. The reflection of the skyline stretched across its surface, mirroring a city that never paused, even as decisions inside it quietly reshaped everything. Inside the vehicle, the silence had settled into something steady, no longer heavy, no longer uncertain. It carried direction now. The driver eased the car to a smooth stop at the curb, stepping out quickly to open the door. Naomi did not move right away. She looked out at the building for a moment, her reflection faint in the window, then shifted her gaze toward Ethan. Once we step out, she said, this becomes visible. Ethan nodded once, understanding exactly what she meant. Decisions made in private rooms could be contained. Decisions carried into public spaces could not. It already is, he replied. Naomi gave a small, thoughtful nod. The phone on the seat beside him lit up again, not with a call this time, but a series of messages stacking one after another, the screen filling with attempts to re-establish control from the other side. Ethan glanced at it briefly, then left it untouched. Naomi noticed the shift in his attention, even if it lasted only a second. They have moved past negotiation, she said. Ethan's expression remained calm. They have moved into recovery, he replied. Naomi considered that, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of her laptop. Recovery requires acknowledgement, she said. Ethan looked at her. Yes, he agreed. And they are not there yet. The distinction settled into place. Naomi exhaled quietly, then reached for the door as the driver held it open. She stepped out first, the air outside cooler now, carrying the faint edge of evening. The city lights had begun to flicker on, small points of brightness cutting through the deepening blue. Ethan followed a step behind, the door closing softly as the car pulled away from the curb, leaving them standing at the base of the building. For a moment, neither of them moved. The entrance loomed ahead, wide glass doors reflecting their figures back at them, no longer separated by hierarchy or position, but standing in quiet alignment. Inside, the lobby stretched out in clean lines and polished stone, the soft echo of footsteps and distant voices carrying through the space. As they stepped in, a few heads turned, subtle recognition passing through the room. People noticed shifts like this, even if they did not yet understand them. Naomi walked forward without hesitation, her pace steady, her presence grounded. Ethan matched her stride, not leading, not following, simply moving beside her. At the far end of the lobby, the elevator bank stood waiting, doors opening and closing in quiet intervals. As they approached, one of the senior managers stepped forward, his expression composed but attentive. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his tone respectful, but edged with curiosity. "We heard the meeting ended early." Ethan did not slow. "It ended when it needed to," he replied. The answer was simple, but it carried enough weight to stop any further questions. The manager nodded, stepping back without pressing, sensing that this was not a moment for clarification. Naomi glanced briefly at Ethan, then back toward the elevators. "News travels fast," she said quietly. Ethan allowed a faint acknowledgement. "It always does," he replied. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting the shift that had already taken place. As the doors closed, sealing them off from the lobby, Naomi turned slightly toward him. "They are going to reach out here next," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Let them," he said. Naomi studied him for a second. "You are not concerned about how this looks internally," she observed. Ethan met her gaze. "I am concerned about what it represents," he said. The distinction was clear. Naomi held that for a moment, then gave a small nod, understanding settling into place. The elevator began its ascent, the numbers lighting up one by one as they rose back into the structure they had just left, but not to the same place they had been before. "Then we need to be consistent," she said. Ethan's response came without hesitation. "We will be," he said. The certainty in his voice left no space for doubt. The elevator continued upward, carrying them toward the next step, not defined by what they had walked away from, but by what they had chosen to stand for, a line now drawn not just in a contract, but in everything that would follow. The elevator slowed as it approached the executive floor, the soft deceleration barely noticeable but enough to signal arrival. The mirrored walls reflected Naomi and Ethan standing side by side, not as they had been earlier in the day, but as something recalibrated, something clearer. The doors opened with a quiet chime, revealing a corridor lined with glass offices, warm lighting spilling across the polished floor. Conversations inside those offices softened as they stepped out, not stopping completely, but shifting just enough to acknowledge their presence. News had already begun to move ahead of them. Naomi walked forward first, her pace steady, her posture composed, but there was a subtle difference now, something in the way people looked at her, not past her. Ethan followed at the same measured distance, his expression unchanged, but his awareness sharp. At the end of the corridor, his office stood with its door partially open, a clear line of sight into a space that overlooked the city from even higher above. Before they reached it, another figure stepped out from a side office, intercepting their path with careful timing. Daniel Reeves, head of operations, his expression controlled but alert. "Ethan," he said, his voice low but direct. "We just got off a call with their legal team." Ethan did not slow. "I assumed you would," he replied. Daniel fell into step beside them, his tone tightening slightly. "They are saying there has been a misunderstanding," he continued. "They are asking for a chance to clarify before anything becomes official." Naomi's gaze remained forward, but her attention shifted subtly. She did not interrupt. She did not need to. Ethan's response came without hesitation. "It is already official," he said. Daniel glanced between them, then lowered his voice slightly. "They are willing to remove the clause entirely," he added, "and adjust the terms in our favor." Naomi stopped walking. Not abruptly. Just enough to create a pause. Ethan stopped with her. Daniel turned fully now, sensing the shift. Naomi looked at him, her expression calm, her voice even. Did they acknowledge why it was there? She asked. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. They said it was standard language, he replied. Naomi held his gaze, steady. That is not an acknowledgement, she said. The distinction landed clearly. Daniel exhaled quietly, his shoulders tightening just slightly. They are trying to fix it, he said. Ethan looked at him now, directly. They are trying to contain it, he corrected. Daniel absorbed that, his expression shifting from urgency to consideration. The difference was not small. It changed the entire direction of the conversation. This deal was significant, Daniel said after a moment, his tone more measured now. Walking away sends a message. Ethan nodded once. It does, he agreed. Daniel studied him. Then we need to be clear on what that message is, he said. Naomi's eyes moved briefly to Ethan, then back to Daniel. That we do not negotiate under pressure, she said. Ethan added, his voice calm but precise, and we do not partner with people who require correction before they show respect. The word settled into the corridor, quiet but unmistakable. A few nearby conversations paused completely now, the shift no longer subtle. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding beginning to align with what had already been decided. They are going to escalate this, he said. Ethan's expression remained unchanged. Let them, he replied. Naomi adjusted her hold on her laptop slightly, her posture steady. Escalation without accountability only makes the problem visible, she said. Daniel looked between them, then gave a small, decisive nod. Understood, he said. I will inform the board. Ethan placed a hand lightly against the door of his office, pushing it open fully. Make sure they understand the context, he said. Daniel gave a brief nod. They will, he replied. Naomi stepped inside first, the office opening up around her, the skyline stretching beyond the glass like a reminder of scale, of perspective. Ethan followed, the door closing softly behind them, sealing off the corridor and the growing awareness outside. Inside, the space felt still, grounded, untouched by the noise that was beginning to build elsewhere. Naomi set her laptop down on the desk with a quiet, deliberate motion, then turned slightly toward Ethan. They are going to keep trying, she said. Ethan walked to the window, looking out over the city for a brief moment before answering. I know, he said. Naomi studied him, her expression calm but certain. And we are not going to change our position, she said. It was not a question. Ethan turned back to face her, his voice steady, final. No, he said. We are not. The answer settled into the room with clarity, anchoring everything that would come next. Outside, the city continued to move, unaware of the line that had just been drawn inside this office, a line that was no longer negotiable, no longer flexible, but fixed in place, defining not just a decision, but the standard that would follow it. The office remained quiet after the door closed, but it was not the kind of silence that followed uncertainty. It was the kind that came after something had already been decided, something that no longer needed to be debated. Naomi stood near the desk, her laptop resting in front of her, her fingers lightly touching its edge without opening it. She did not rush back into work. She did not fill the space with movement. Instead, she let the moment settle, fully, completely. Across the room, Ethan stood by the window, the city stretching endlessly beneath him, lights beginning to glow as the day moved into evening. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The distance between them was not physical. It was reflective. Then Naomi broke the silence, her voice calm, grounded. They are going to change their tone, she said. Ethan did not turn immediately. They already have, he replied. Naomi watched him for a moment, then nodded slightly. Then the next step is acknowledgement, she said. Ethan turned now, his expression steady. No, he said. The next step is accountability. The distinction settled into the room, heavier than the words themselves. Naomi considered it, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. Most people do not offer that unless they are forced to, she said. Ethan walked back toward the desk, his movements controlled, deliberate. That is why we are not waiting for it, he replied. Naomi's eyes followed him as he stopped across from her, the space between them now smaller, more direct. Then what are we waiting for? She asked. Ethan reached for a folder on the desk, opening it briefly, then closing it again as if confirming something already known. We are not waiting, he said. We are moving. Naomi's expression shifted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. To what? She asked. Ethan met her gaze. To the next opportunity, he said. The answer was simple, but it carried forward with clarity. Naomi nodded once, her focus sharpening. Do you already have something in mind? She asked. Ethan allowed a faint, almost imperceptible shift in expression. I always do, he replied. Naomi's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but enough to acknowledge the truth in that statement. The phone on the desk vibrated again, this time louder in the quiet room, the screen lighting up with another attempt to reach him. Ethan glanced at it briefly, then picked it up. For a second, it seemed like he might answer. But instead, he pressed a button, not to accept the call, but to end it completely, silencing it with finality. Naomi watched the motion closely. That was the last one, she said. Ethan placed the phone back down, his voice calm. For now, he replied. Naomi tilted her head slightly. You think they will try something else, she said. Ethan nodded once. They will try to reposition themselves, he said. They will try to come back as if this never happened. Naomi's gaze sharpened. And we will remind them that it did, she said. Ethan held her eyes. We will not need to, he replied. The fact that we walked away already did that. The clarity of the statement settled between them, anchoring the moment further. Naomi exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing into a steady calm. Then this is bigger than the deal, she said. Ethan did not hesitate. It always was, he replied. The words carried weight, not as a realization, but as confirmation. Naomi looked at him for a long second, then nodded, the understanding complete. Outside, the city lights reflected against the glass, the skyline no longer just a backdrop, but a reminder of scale, of reach, of what came next. Naomi stepped slightly to the side, opening her laptop now, the screen lighting up as she began to move forward without hesitation. Then we should not slow down, she said. Ethan adjusted his jacket, his posture steady, his focus aligned. We will not, he replied. The room remained quiet, but it was no longer still. It was active, directed, moving forward without needing to look back. And somewhere beyond the walls of that office, the people who had tried to recover what they had lost were beginning to understand that some things, once revealed, could not be undone, no matter how quickly they tried to change the story. The city lights had fully taken over by the time Naomi finished reviewing the last set of numbers on her screen, the glow from the skyline reflecting softly across the glass walls of the office. The room no longer felt like the same space they had walked into earlier that day. It had shifted, not in structure, but in meaning. Naomi closed her laptop slowly, the soft click echoing faintly, and looked up. Ethan was still by the window, not working, not speaking, just watching the city as if measuring something far beyond contracts or numbers. For a moment, she studied him, not as a subordinate, not as an assistant, but as someone who had just seen a decision carried all the way through without hesitation. You knew this would define more than the deal, she said. Ethan did not turn right away. I knew it had the potential to, he replied. Naomi stepped forward slightly, her posture steady, her voice calm but grounded in something deeper now. Most people would have adjusted, she said. Taken the correction, kept the money, and moved on. Ethan turned then, his expression clear, unshaken. Most people are focused on the outcome, he said. Naomi held his gaze. And you are not, she asked. Ethan gave a small, almost thoughtful pause before answering. I am focused on the pattern, he said. The distinction settled with quiet weight. Naomi nodded once, understanding forming fully now. Because patterns repeat, she said. Ethan stepped away from the window, moving closer, not with urgency, but with intention. Exactly, he said. And once you see one clearly, you do not ignore it just because it is inconvenient. Naomi let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing, not from relief, but from clarity. Then this was never about $80 million, she said. Ethan's response came without hesitation. No, he said. It was about what it would cost later if we ignored it. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt complete, like a thought that had reached its conclusion. Naomi glanced briefly toward the city, then back at him. They are going to talk about this, she said. Ethan allowed a faint nod. They already are, he replied. Naomi's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in recognition of how quickly things moved at this level. Some will say you overreacted, she said. Ethan met her eyes. Some will, he agreed. Naomi tilted her head slightly. And others, she asked. Ethan's expression remained steady. Others will understand exactly why we did it, he said. The balance of those two outcomes hung in the air, but neither of them seemed concerned by it. Naomi stepped closer to the desk, resting her hand lightly against its surface, grounding herself in the moment. Then the message is clear, she said. Ethan nodded once. It is, he replied. Naomi looked at him for a long second, then spoke again, her voice quieter now, more personal, though still controlled. You did not step in to save me, she said. Ethan's expression did not change, but his answer came immediately. You did not need saving, he said. Naomi held his gaze, the truth of that statement settling deeper than anything said before. Then why did you wait? She asked. The question was direct, but not confrontational. Ethan took a small step closer, his voice calm, steady. Because I needed them to show you exactly who they were, he said. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in realization. And you needed to show them who you are, she said. Ethan gave a faint nod. Yes, he replied. The exchange settled between them, not as a power shift, but as alignment. Naomi straightened slightly, her posture returning to its usual composed state, but something about her presence had changed. It was no longer defined by her role. It was defined by her clarity. Then they learned something today, she said. Ethan glanced briefly toward the city one last time. They did, he said. Naomi followed his gaze, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass, filled with opportunities, decisions, and people who had yet to understand where the line truly was. And so did we, she added. Ethan looked back at her, his expression steady, grounded. Yes, he said. We did. The office remained quiet, but it no longer felt like a place of reaction. It felt like a starting point. Outside, the city continued moving, unaware of the standard that had just been set inside those walls. And inside, without needing to say anything more, both of them understood that what came next would not be shaped by what they had walked away from, but by what they had chosen to stand for, a line that once crossed could not be redrawn, and a decision that would carry far beyond a single deal into everything that followed.